part 2 of my brief video tutorial on sanding equipment that you'll find helpful as you make your bowls. In part 1, I demonstrated the use of the vertical belt sander and also of the disc sander that tends to come attached with it. And this is our oscillating spindle sander. This is not the kind of tool you're likely to find in a home shop. Again, one of the advantages of working in a community shop is that some of the equipment is simply larger and more heavy duty than you'll find at home. But there are a number of very nice workbench top spindle sanders that are available, often with tilting tables. This one has spindles as small as about 1/4 of an inch, also very short, and has spindles as large as 4 inches. 3 inches is about as large as I use, and there are 2 functions for which I use the spindle sander. One of them is to sand in curves. All right, rather than taking you through the tedious process of sanding it down, I can show you that this was a blank that was glued up from 2 angled pieces and 1 flat piece in the middle. All right, this is commonly used for necks of vases where you want to get a sort of a traditional flared effect. Now, to sand these, what you do basically is you find a spindle that's the right size and it fits right in. Now, this is attached to a dust collection system which does not function, since all the dust goes on top of the table anyway, so I'm not going to turn that on. Basically, that's the way you work it. If you can hold it up in the air, you can put it down. Some people build a little jig to hold things steady if it's larger, but basically you're using it on its side to sand in a curve, and this is what gives many of the pieces the look of being turned on a lathe. I've done this kind of curve sometimes on the very bottom of a vase to give it just a little bit of curve in there. And you vary the size of the spindle. Sometimes I'll start with a smaller spindle, work my way up. You need to look at the overall contour you're trying to achieve. Now, another use that the spindle sander is good for is for sanding the inside of bowls. I don't have a set of rings glued up without a base handy, but the principle is the same. Sometimes, let's say you cut a ring and there's a nasty irregularity, and you don't want to waste your good sanding ball on it. This table tilts, and as I mentioned before, many of the home versions tilt as well. This table has 2 controls, one on each side, that loosen up. And then the table tilts, and there's a gauge, or you can use one of those little magnetic gauges that I had in my pocket before, but that I showed in the first part of the video. I must have put it down somewhere. And what you do is you set the table to the angle that you've cut your ring, and you're going to rotate it. See, once you set your table, you should lock it into place. You're going to rotate the ring and gradually smooth it. Now, there's one very important thing to keep in mind. I know it's important because the first time I tried sanding a ring, I completely ruined it. I didn't realize that you can't just rotate it around. The angle is only up here, and that's where you have to meet it. You stand clear, so you rotate it basically around this point, like this. Now, usually you sand against the direction of rotation. However, sometimes when I have something that's very dicey, I may gently go with it just so I'm not fighting it. So that, keep that in mind. And you go around until it's smooth. But there's another caution here. You're looking at the top. You don't see what's happening underneath. If the ring was not cut perfectly, you may look and discover that you've sanded away all the wood you need for gluing. So that when you do this, you check frequently. Now, we have a generous clearance here between the spindle and the ring. If you're working in tighter quarters, you're using a larger spindle, a smaller ring, stop the sander before you take the ring off. Otherwise, you risk catching it, flinging your ring across, and even though it's not a high-speed tool, this is not what you want to do, and you may very well break your ring. All right, so remember, when you do this, you keep it meeting only at the upper part. You rotate it, you keep checking the bottom, whether it's a single ring or a set of rings. And it often saves you a lot of time, a lot of grief. The more you can do on these heavy-duty tools, the less you have to do over at the drill press as you work with the sanding ball or the FlexiPad sander.